a couple of we have a full day, a full morning today about our panel. So welcome everyone. I hope you're all doing well. I hope you're looking forward to the weekend. And thank you so much for joining us this morning. In New York, it's morning, it's 9 a.m. I know many people are joining from other parts of the world, specifically in Southeast Asia. So welcome and thank you so much again for joining us. First, I want to thank everybody for coming and also the organizers for today's session. Zheng Wang is here, our main organizer. And again, this panel is organized by the New York Southeast Asian Network. If you haven't checked it out, please visit the website and check out the membership, check out the events that are coming up, and be part of the community. To begin with, I'm inviting everyone to introduce ourselves very quickly on the chat by dropping in the chat three keywords, just so we can have like a quick introduction of everybody else, of everybody in the room. So I would invite everyone to type in the chat three words: your discipline, your country focus, and one keyword of your project, of your book project or your dissertation project. So I would start now. So I would start with geography, Philippines, and peace. I want to spell it correctly. So I invite everybody in the chat to type in three keywords of your discipline, your country, and one keyword of your project, so we can like build a community, and maybe some of us are working on the same countries or same disciplines or same topics. So again, welcome everyone. So we have over 50 people in the room, so that's wonderful. So this panel, we aim in this panel to provide insights on the process of turning our dissertation into book. So many of us probably in the room have finished our dissertations. Some of us are in the process of writing our dissertation. And I think this is a wonderful opportunity for all of us to gather and talk about the process of turning our dissertation to book. Our session today aims to offer insights on the revision process, proposal writing, editorial, and publication process. We will hear best practices and tips from two editors with academic presses, as well as insights from two recent dissertation book authors. I haven't introduced my name. So my name is Nerv Makaspak. I'm an assistant professor of geography at the Department of Political Science and Global Affairs at the College of Staten Island at the City University of New York. I'm also a graduate faculty at the Earth and Environmental Sciences program at the Graduate Center, also at the City University of New York. Before we introduce our panel speakers for today, I want to invite everyone as well to click on this link of a Jamboard. Like, it's a Jamboard link where we can actually type in or post in our questions for authors and editors. I put it in the chat. I'll put it again during the Q&A, but I'm gonna put it in the chat now so people can load the link in their browser. And you can see it's a Jamboard. You can create your own sticky note, write your questions as our panelists are speaking, and post it under the questions for authors, questions for editors. And at the end, I also invite everyone to write a post-it note of what your takeaway is from the session, so we can actually have a sense of what everybody took away from this wonderful session. Great, wonderful. Okay, so for a quick schedule for today, we have 4 panelists for today. So they will be speaking between 12 to 15 minutes each. And then after they speak, we'll have at least 30 minutes of Q&A. I'm really inviting everyone to take notes and remember their questions, and we can have a wonderful conversation later on. Great, so let me begin by introducing our wonderful panelists for today. We are really grateful and honored that 4 speakers, our wonderful, impressive speakers, are here to join us and give us insights about the dissertation to book process. So first off, we have Sarah Grossman. Sarah is an acquisitions editor at Cornell University Press for U.S. History, Indigenous Studies, and Asian Studies. Sarah is also the editor of Cornell's Southeast Asia Program Publications and the managing editor of Indonesia Journal. At Cornell University Press, Sarah promotes a broad range of scholarship about North America with a non-exclusive emphasis on U.S. foreign relations and indigenous history and culture. Welcome, Sarah. Our next speaker is Dorothea Shafter. And Dorothea is a senior editor for Asian Studies at Routledge Publishers in the UK. Following a degree in Southeast Asian Studies from Passau University in Germany and SOAS at the UK, Dorothea has worked on the Asian Studies list for almost 2 decades. At Routledge, she commissions a wide range of research monographs, edited volumes, textbooks, supplementary textbooks, and handbooks on Southeast Asian Studies, South and Central Asian Studies, and Asian religion. She is passionate about the list and enjoys working with authors and editors. It's wonderful to hear. And we have Professor Benjamin Taussig. Professor Benjamin Taussig is an associate professor of ethnomusicology at Stony Brook University here in New York. His research focuses on music, sound, and political protest in Bangkok, Thailand, in New York City and the American Midwest, among other places. His first monograph, Bangkok is Ringing, Sound, Protest, and Constraint, is published by Oxford University Press. With a particular emphasis on urban space, Professor Benjamin Taussig has given attention to sonic media in context of political upheaval. He has published and taught about the musical activity of military psychology operation units, on protest music as a genre, and on dissent and neoliberalism, among other topics. Professor Taussig teaches sound studies, rock music history, music and protest, and the ethics and methods of fieldwork. Welcome, Professor Benjamin Taussig. And our last, but definitely not the least speaker is Professor Martina T. Nguyen. Professor Martina is an historian of modern Southeast Asia. Her research focuses on colonialism, intellectual life, and social and political reform in 20th century Vietnam. Her book, On Our Own Strength, The Self-Reliant Literary Group, yes, and Cosmopolitan Nationalism in Late Colonial Vietnam, published by the University of Hawaii Press in 2020, examines the historical landscape of 1930s French-occupied Vietnam, arguably the country's most dynamic intellectual and cultural period, as a lens for examining the relationship between cultures of the metropole and colonized societies. Professor Nguyen received her PhD in 2012 from UC Berkeley, and she's a graduate of Northwestern University, where she earned a BA in History and Political Science. Professor Nguyen teaches classes in modern Asia, world history and colonialism, including classes on the Vietnam War, empire and decolonization, women and gender, and fashion at Baruch College at CUNY. So welcome, Professor Martina, and welcome everybody to the session. If you just came in the session, we have 4 impressive panelists, and I'm also going to put again on the chat our Jamboard, where our audience, members of our audience, can type in their chat for our discussion later on. But for now, I'm going to pass on the Zoom floor to Sarah Grossman. We'll start with Sarah from Cornell University Press. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. As you heard from my introduction, I wear many hats here at Cornell, but I'm here to talk to you mostly about my work with the Southeast Asia program. I've run the Southeast Asia program publication since 2014. And I think I've been asked to talk to you about the issue of writing your area studies project for an area studies audience and also for a disciplinary audience. Another way to put that question is to think about the fit of your work for the publisher you wish to publish with. And I would say in my work with SEEP, fit is the #1 issue that I'm always trying to consider. Some projects from people who, perhaps you are getting a PhD in anthropology and you think, I really want to talk to anthropologists about my amazing work on Cambodia. It's just, I've done all this anthropology. I've thought a lot about the active anthropology, what it means to be an anthropologist, my subject position within the field. This is my audience. If that's what you want for your book, that's your audience, Southeast Asia Program Publications is not for you. You might want to talk to my colleague at Cornell University Press who acquires an anthropology. But very likely my editorial board will say, yeah, but what am I going to learn about Cambodia? And so, but if you're an anthropologist who's done lots of work on Cambodia and you look at your project and you think about your dissertation and you think, gosh, I have learned things that everyone needs to know about this nation. This nation is the center of my subject, of my study. That orientation is correct for area studies. So this should be your number one question. And there's no right answer, right? There are publishers, you will find a publisher to do either of those things. This is something where you yourself as the author have to really consider what your purpose is in conducting research. So that piece is on you as an author. What's on us as a publisher is when I hear a project, when someone pitches a project to me that I think is very interesting, I'll ask questions about your audience, which you should be prepared to answer. But I will also try to work with you on the things that an area studies audience, that I think an area studies audience wants. And the reason I think the area studies audience wants these things is because they buy my books. And that's kind of my major measure. The things that they want are narrative. The things that they want are empirical data, a clear data source, and again, a clear indication of what information you're bringing to other people who are interested in your nation or in your set of nations. Honestly, I don't have better advice than that. Within the work of transforming your perhaps disciplinary dissertation into something that will suit an area studies audience, one thing to think about is your methodology. How important is your methodology? How much methodology do you need to describe? Are you in your dissertation research working between two fields? If you are working between two fields, maybe writing for political scientists, but conducting interviews and ethnographic research, that's something that needs to be explained. If that's your project, you are a very strong candidate for an area studies press and a less strong candidate for a disciplinary press. But that will need to be explained in some detail right up front. Do I need a whole chapter on it? Please no. Just a few sentences. So if as part of your dissertation, you're doing a big literature review, you're doing a big explanation of your research base, you're doing a big explanation of your methodology, remove that. Just put it to the side. Take it totally out of your manuscript until you're asked for it. Condense it into a couple of sentences, send it forward. Let's see. What else can I say about your disciplinary work? Talk to your editor. Your editor is going to be very important. Again, this comes back to fit. There are projects that the Southeast Asia Program Publications does not really work with. We have not published in art history in 15 to 20 years. You may have a brilliant work in art history that has lots of things to say to historians and anthropologists and sociologists, and I'm not going to publish it. Not because I don't think it's interesting or worthy, but because I simply don't have the skill set at the press. I don't have the ability to market it. We do not have the ability to print really beautiful art in the interior of our books, unless you come to us with $45,000 and then we'll complain about it, but we'll print it. So please, this is again something for you to be aware of. Think about where your favorite books are published and think, are those favorite books less than 5 years old? Because if they're more than 5 years old, you should find some new favorite books that have been recently published and find the editor who worked on them. That's so important. This is a very personalistic business. And even if you've written something that I think is maybe, it's a little like disciplinary, you're talking in this really poli-sci language that my editorial board is gonna think you're not telling me enough about culture. But if I understand your project, If I think your project is of interest, if I can see how it can be marketed to a broader audience, then I will be interested in that and will sell it to my editorial board. And so that's a piece of the puzzle that's very important, and that you will only learn from speaking directly one-on-one with editors all over the place. I know it's intimidating, but I swear to you, we love talking to authors. That's how you get into this profession. I did a PhD. I was terrified of editors. I don't know why. In retrospect, they all wanted to talk to me, and I want to talk to you. So please don't hesitate to send that initial email. And I'll stop there. I think probably, I hope I've given you something to think about, and you can follow up in the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That's wonderful. I mean, like, absolutely. Like, I think we don't interact with editors that much during our PhD experience. So I think the fear is definitely real. But it's great to know that editors actually welcome the conversation. So thank you so much. And again, we'll get back to some of the points that Sarah touched upon during the Q&A. I'll pass the Zoom floor to Dorothea, our next speaker from Routledge.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for having me, really. It's a great pleasure to see everybody and to have such a good turnout. I just wanted to reiterate what Sarah said. We love engaging with authors. I mean, that's, I think, the main reason why we got into this profession, really. I mean, you probably heard I studied Southeast Asian studies. I did an MPhil on Indonesian literature. I love engaging with all kinds of research, and especially Southeast Asian studies, but of course the other areas as well. So I can really just emphasize and echo what Sarah has said. And I have a PowerPoint presentation. I will share my screen now, but I hope that you'll see me now. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, wonderful. And there will be a few things that Sarah has already said. So I think I can maybe skip over that and go a bit faster, so I won't keep you that long. Today I will talk a little bit about navigating the publishing process. And you'll see here an array of books, recent published books on Southeast Asian studies that we've got on our list. Oh no, sorry. Here we are. So from identifying a publisher with your book idea and seeing where it might fit to publication, that entails a various number of steps. And today I'll just talk about from the book idea to contract stage, which is about 0.6 here. And it all makes up the life cycle of the book. So first and foremost, you want to identify a publisher. And as Sarah has said, look at related titles, see where your favorite books are published and try and contact the editors about that. Look at the publishers' websites. What do they currently have for trends? What kind of series are there that could be suitable, that have the same topic or same also disciplinary reach that your dissertation or your book really wants to kind of speak to? Ask your colleagues for advice. Which publisher did you publish with? Who did you talk to? Or who did you see? Or whose book did you read? And which publisher was that? And just be open-minded for which publishers you really want to target and where you want your book to appear. You can check for any costs associated with publishing. That still can happen. For example, at Routledge, we ask an author to pay for the indexing costs if the author doesn't want to do it themselves. That is a cost that usually you can talk about, and there are ways around that, for example, by doing the index yourself, where we give you guidance for that. There might also, some other publishers might ask for other publishing costs. At Routledge, for us, it really is the index that is the most important cost that come. A little bit about ethics in terms of multiple submission. Always advise you to be very open with the editors that you're in touch with and just say, well, I've also approached that press. Is that problem? Or how do you submissions? Because presses have a different view on this. Some want exclusive assessment and exclusive peer review. Others say you're not committed to a publisher until you sign a contract. So really just make that clear. A small advice I would say, though, if you approach multiple presses, just make sure that you approach the right press and really adapt your cover letter appropriately, because it doesn't bode well if you get the wrong publisher name or so. It just, I think we're only human as well. There is always, remember that there's an editor who's a human being who kind of sits there and assesses your submission. And here's just a quick overview of what you can expect from book idea to contract. So you have the proposal, then the internal editorial assessment. After that, the book, the material for the book might go for peer review. You will then discuss the reviews with the editor. There's an internal editorial board meeting at the press. And then they decide whether to publish, reject, or publish under the condition that there's revisions. And then there's the contract. The proposal is kind of your business card or your elevator pitch in a way of your project. So really make sure that you spend some time on writing that. It doesn't need to be that long. Between 4 and 6 pages is absolutely sufficient. I didn't add here that we of course want a copy of your CV as well, which I should have added here, but so bear that in mind, we do want a copy of your CV. Please state your proposed title and your name. Sometimes people forget to put the name up top, and I always think it's nice to see the title in conjunction with the author's name, just so you create associations. A section on why this book, what's the rationale for your book, why is it important, why now, what's the topic? A table of contents, and then chapter summaries. So what exactly is your book doing? What is it achieving? How is it structured? And just a paragraph is enough per chapter. Who will read the book and what's the market for the book? So most revised PhDs are monographs, so they get sold to the international academic library market in the first instance. So of course, then you can indicate which disciplines your book will speak to. And Sarah has talked to that. Of course, if you're working on an area studies, in area studies, you will always have a discipline that you speak to. Sometimes you speak to multiple disciplines, and just list those as well. Mention any competing titles or related titles and how your book is different from that, or what it is, how it is similar or expands on ideas of those books. An indication about the format of the book, so how many words, do you plan to include any tables or figures or other illustrations? Because those specifications are for us editors important, because we can judge then how expensive it would be to produce the book. So, you know, if a book is 200,000 words in length, that would be something we would flag up from the very beginning and say that this is not appropriate for our publishing program. Can you think of revising it to reduce the length, for example? Just because books above a certain length, and we usually say 100,000 words, really the publishing costs, the production costs rise exponentially. A timeline for completion of your manuscript is also important. I always ask for extra information for books based on a PhD, and I have some proposal guidelines that I've asked to be circulated either in the chat or after the session, and there are some indications which I will pick up now as well. And then we always ask for some sample chapters or even the complete manuscript. And in the case of a book based on a thesis, we actually don't encourage to submit the thesis. We would like to see revised sample chapters. So for books based on a PhD thesis, it's a little bit different, just because the thesis has a different audience than the book. The thesis is written mostly for your examiners. It's a very narrow audience. And now what you need to do is you expand your your findings and your book so that it speaks to a wider audience. So in the first instance, you can identify the parts that you will cut or modify. So as Sarah said, the methodology section, either scrap it completely or just incorporate it with a little bit of the literature review into the introduction. So again, also the literature review doesn't have to be extensive. It really is just, we want to know what's your own argument. We really want you to draw out your finding, expand on that, and really make sure that you bring that to the fore. So definitely omit or change aspects of the word which are designed to satisfy your examiners. So really just take out what your examiners are required you to include, so that they really want to see that you've covered the ground. You might consider adding case studies or something a bit more comparative. You might wish to consider the restructuring the content of the book or the order of the chapters. But in effect, you should focus on your overarching theme and your main argument, and just that should connect all the chapters. This is a whole slide with adapting the language and style, just because these are tips that come over and over again. And the very first one, I'm sure Sarah would agree with that, thesis needs to be replaced with book or chapter. Same with article or essay if you have published one of the chapters as an article before. Avoid jargon that's not necessary. Don't use colloquialisms or abbreviations. Especially I know in Indonesian studies or with Indonesia, if you're working on politics, there's lots of acronyms that appear. Reduce those, or if necessary, add a glossary. Not everybody will know what lekra means or what those acronyms mean. Consider reducing the footnotes. Also consider using the length of quotations, because if we publish a book and the quotes are too long, you need to seek permission for that. So it really, also, we want to know your own argument. You don't need to quote so much of other people's work. So just really consider that. Of course, some quotes are absolutely necessary, so I'm not disputing that. In terms of writing, all paragraphs should be self-contained, which is kind of obvious, but it's worth looking through the manuscript again and just checking that. Shorter sentences, especially as like me, you're coming from a background where lengthy sentences with lots of side sentences are normal. Try to reduce that. Make sure that the conclusions of the chapters tie together your argument and state the major points that emerge from your argument. And then streamline your argument and the writing and check if there's any overlaps or any repetitions that can be omitted between the chapters. So you really need to look at the manuscript as a whole. I meant the introduction should be an accessible intro to your book. So it should be accessible to the general reader. Your parents should be able to understand it, or a friend who's not in the field. Excuse me. The conclusion should highlight your empirical findings or any theoretical or methodological advancements that you have. And it should be the contribution to the field and to the wider discipline, if that's appropriate. Of course, sometimes some time might have passed since you completed your research. So then make sure you're updated with recent research findings, with events that have happened. For example, in Myanmar, the recent events that have just happened that need to be taken into account. Make sure you include any new publications that were published since the time you've passed your Viva. As for references, I always say you can pick your referencing style as long as you apply it consistently throughout the text. Publishers have their referencing style and their house style and their instructions for authors, which can be found on the web. But I think in the first instance, you need to just show that you can apply your references consistently. And I would be the last person to say that, oh, no, you have to really use Harvard style here or whatever. First, it really is consistency. Because now our books are published electronically, we always want end of chapter references so that the chapters can be seen in isolation. So sometimes just the chapter will be seen and not the entire monograph by customers. So definitely include end of chapter references. I would always advise you that you should have your book proposal and also the revised chapters read by colleagues or by friends, or maybe even consider somebody who can read through it with a fine-tooth comb and just provide some help with copy editing. And then the final word really on the title. It's nice to have quite poetic titles, so something that picks up maybe a title of a pamphlet that was important during the research, or a proverb that's used in an anthropological setting. But for us, it's really important that the titles are descriptive. They include keywords and that they are discoverable, which means they can, when you search for them online, they can come up. It needs to be, if a book is on Vietnam, it needs to be Vietnam, and maybe the time period, or a little bit an indication of the discipline as well. All right, we move on to the internal assessment, editorial assessment. It is, like Sarah said,
we have 1 more minute.
1 more minute. Okay, I'm almost done. Basically, we just look at quality and the sales potential. You can see it here. We really need to see that a book fits into the list and that it will be appropriate for the publisher. And then we'll send it up for peer review if we have the material available. You can see here what the Reader's Report questionnaire includes. I'll just rush up and finish up. And the Reader's Reports will be sent to you for comments and for your response. And I would just one tip that I would pass on is, don't be afraid to respond to the Reader's Reports. The people have taken the time to read your material. They want to help you in most cases. And so just argue if you don't want to accept some of the suggestions made. Argue and say why this is not necessary that you take it on, or accept the suggestions made and be thankful and move on. And then you have the discussion with your editor on how to move forward and how to define the book. At the editorial board meeting, the book gets passed or rejected or recommended for resubmission. And then there's the contract. And I'll move here. I can just say we have author resources and there's lots of links. So sometimes the website can be difficult to navigate, so I'll leave this here just briefly. Thank you for your time. I'm sorry, this took longer than I expected. So.
This is great. Thank you so much, Dorothy. Yeah, really appreciate the comprehensive walking us through the book proposal process as well, and all the nuts and bolts of the book. Great. So let's thank you so much again for our 2 editors who gave us so much helpful insights for this process. Now we'll switch from editors to authors. So we have 2 scholars who just recently published their first monograph, and we're excited to have them here and learn from their experiences and best practices. So we'll start with Professor Benjamin Taussig. Benjamin, I'll give the Zoom floor to you.
Thank you, Nerv. Thank you first of all for inviting us here, and thanks to Martina and to Dorothea and Sarah for your great comments so far, and to Martina for your comments to come. I really appreciate being here, but I also want to say thank you to everyone who is in attendance, and to just express my absolute enthusiasm for your work and my excitement about your work and my gratitude for you being here. And my hope that this can be not so much a lecture as the beginning of some community building. And with that said, I would like to very much invite you to put questions into the chat while I'm talking. It's not an interruption at all. In fact, it's very helpful. It's easy to take a quick look if I'm using language or talking about things that you don't quite understand. It's really handy to be able to refer to questions and correct myself. So please feel very free. I'm also putting my own website URL in the chat in case anybody's interested in learning more. So for purposes of this presentation, I'm assuming that the audience here are folks who have completed their dissertations and are at the beginning or somewhere in the middle of adapting their work into a publishable book. But I'm sure there are others who are at other phases. So don't hesitate to also throw questions into the chat that might be pertinent to your own situation. So I'll start by telling you very quickly about my own book and my own process. My book was about a 10-year process, which is very normal, from the time that the research began to the time that the book came out. So I started fieldwork in Bangkok, Thailand in 2010, where I was embedded for a year and a half with an anti-government protest movement called the Red Shirts. Ethnographic fieldwork, which is what I did, can be very chaotic, frightening, and uncertain. And my research was all of those things. Research-wise, I was concerned with the music and sound of the Red Shirt movement. That's my disciplinary area, or at least part of my disciplinary area. And the movement, I was concerned with the ways that the movement utilized music and sound to sustain itself, to advertise itself, and to communicate its political objections. There was also substantial violence where I was doing fieldwork and when I was doing fieldwork, and the sound of conflict was a central topic. So all of that is to underscore how unstable the fieldwork really was. And when I finished, I had a kind of a massive pile of materials, photographs, my own diary entries, musical objects, videos, and generally disconnected ideas, which is okay. You may be at that point or near that point as well. And dissertation writing was in some ways a matter of identifying key themes and then writing about them essayistically, sometimes in isolation, right? So writing about one part and not necessarily thinking about the totality of it yet. In fact, I didn't quite know what the dissertation was about until I was almost finished, which I think is actually not only normal but good. I think that you close off possibilities if you decide too soon what your thesis is or what your point is. I wrote the introduction last, which I think also was healthy. And then after I defended the dissertation, I did something really important, which is that I stepped away from the manuscript for about a year. Never underestimate the power of time for granting you the ability to assess your own work with clear eyes. So that might, in some cases, be a few hours. If you're kind of stuck on a writing problem, it could be a few days, it could even be a few months. But when you come back to something with the benefit of some time in between, you can really see it in new ways. And I find that I can be much better with my self-editing when I've given myself a little bit of space like that. And then when it came time to adapt the material into a book, which I started doing in earnest in 2015, the first step was to reconsider the book's themes. And we heard some really great advice and commentary about this from Sarah and Dorothea already. But I more or less always knew that I would thematize protest. I knew that would be at the center of the book, and Thailand as well. So Thailand and protest would be there. But what about it, right? Beyond that, what more narrowly did I want to say? And it took time and a lot of consideration that I decided to decide that I wanted to thread two fields, essentially, which was Thai studies and sound studies. And when I made that decision, I did it very intentionally. And I thought about the things that I wanted to say to each field, the modes I wanted to be in to address each field, the topics that I felt like were not being taken up, that I could say something new about. I really put a lot of effort into thinking about, what those points were, right? If trying to distill them to something very simple, and then to sort of advance them intentionally throughout the book. I also thought, almost to the point of obsession, about what I owed my interlocutors, the people who would be represented in the book. And when I adapted it, I left in sentences or entire stories that I knew would matter very deeply to the people who had the highest stakes in these political movements that I had studied. Now, what I took out, on the other hand, and I know that the editors who are in the room will be pleased about this or will agree with this, but was the stuff that sort of felt to me like the less wonderful parts of graduate school. So the references to high theory that I never quite felt sure about, the discussions that an outside reader on my committee, a specific outside reader, might have really cared about, but that few other people would. And I remember distinctly feeling like the manuscript was finally finished being revised when I deleted one last reference to Derrida that I just didn't feel like I could stand behind. And I knew that I had taken some of the rust of graduate school off after I'd done that. It's scary but true. People will read your book, your colleagues, your friends, and there are multiple rounds of revisions to a dissertation manuscript, but at least one round should involve putting yourself in the shoes or the mindset of someone that you really love and trust, I mean, like your best friend, your mother, your closest colleague, like somebody who's not necessarily an academic at all, but who you know is smart, who reads smart things and knows how to think. Put yourself in their shoes and read the entire manuscript, and target those sentences that that you think that this trusted reader would be confused by, or would look at skeptically. That's a very, very healthy round of revisions. Like, how do you make the book legible and believable and meaningful to that person? And fortunately, that kind of revision is a critical step in crafting a book that publishers will want, because readability matters enormously at every level. There's really very little to be gained by getting fancy with your prose, with your arguments. I mean, you can save that for future books or maybe never. I think that being plain spoken and direct and defensively so is very, very important, and that comes with readability, right? Those things work together. So do multiple passes through your entire manuscript. As Dorothea mentioned, do one to thin your citations. Only use citations that you really need to cite. Citations are kind of like, they sort of work like supports, right? But once the book is a book, people will trust you on many matters. You don't have to, when you're sort of channeling Foucault a little bit, you don't necessarily have to use Foucault's name. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, you can say something Foucauldian without citing Foucault. Like, he's got enough citations out there. He'll be all right. Do another pass through for sentence efficiency. You can't underestimate how much it can matter to just sort of recraft that sentence, like that one that feels a little awkward, that doesn't quite get where it's supposed to be going. Spend some time with it, make it a few words shorter. All of a sudden you have something that like really uplifts the writing rather than holds it back. So do a pass for sentence efficiency. Do another one for paragraph integrity. I like to think about writing as a series of triangles. So like your book is one triangle, right? With an argumentative point here at the top, and then everything supports that one argumentative point. But your paragraph should work that way too, right? Your thesis statement in a paragraph should say one thing very clearly, and everything else under it should support that peak, right? So you have these little mini triangles inside of a giant triangle, which is the book. Make sure that your paragraphs all say something consistent, right? That they don't change tacks in the middle. Do another pass for poetics, right? Like find beautiful, evocative words and copy them, and figure out a place where like that's exactly the word that you mean. Try to be like that. And of course, as you proceed, as you're doing these passes, at some point, try to decide on your argument in a way that can be expressed in one or two sentences. That's very important. That really is what your book should lead with. Somewhere in the first few paragraphs, there should be just a very clear statement of your thesis, and that thesis should then be called back to numerous times throughout the manuscript. Callbacks are really nice. They really help the reader move through your argument, right? If they understand that you're grounded, right? So you have a couple of keywords that you just keep coming back to, and the reader sees how you're again and again substantiating the main points. That's what a tight book reads like. And yet, nothing that I can say I think is as important as one word, which I'm going to give you in a moment here, that I think marks any successful book revision process. Shelley asked in the chat, did you say put the argument in one or two paragraphs? I meant in the first few paragraphs of the text, right? So sometimes people will start with a story and then give their thesis, but somewhere in the first couple of pages, you want to make it you want to put in your thesis and also make it very clear that that's what your thesis is, right? Like the thesis of this book, like don't be afraid to be that blunt. So I kept you waiting long enough. The thing that the final piece of advice that I want to leave you with is to find community and to write with community. I cannot underscore how important this is. Revising a manuscript from a dissertation to a book should not must not be an isolated process. It's not only a bad idea, it not only will result in an inferior book, but I think it's actually very dangerous to do it. It's dangerous for your mental health. It's a very difficult, kind of arcane, stressful process in many ways, and you should not do it alone. It's not the kind of thing that's healthy emotionally to do alone. But also, you can go down some paths that are ill-advised, and you need people reading to keep you honest. So by community, I just mean finding people who care about particular parts of your argumentation. Right, I'm working on a project now that's a historical project, and I've just met as many people as I can, right, who are also in their own ways, whether it's like sort of family genealogy in Thailand, or people who are music fans or whatever, who are just also invested in the same questions, and we just share, right? Like, I mean, I find a cool research thing, and I just send it to them, and then I maybe send them a couple pages of writing, and I say, like, what do you think? And people will keep you honest. They'll tell you, like, oh, this is beautiful, this is great. Or they'll tell you, I think, I don't think you're quite right here. I think you need to think about this more, or like, did you know about this? And when you build that kind of community, the research process, it doesn't feel like a slog. It feels social, and it feels like something that you're doing with other people, even if they're not scholars. In fact, I would recommend having some community that's not scholarly. It's everyone figures it out in their own way. But I think that community is the single most important thing to build into the revision process. Thank you for listening. I hope this is helpful. I'll put my email in the chat, and I really very much would love to keep speaking with all of you. It's an exciting community, and I'm very happy to be part of it.
Thank you so much, Professor Benjamin Tosig. Thank you for that metaphor of the triangle. That's really helpful. Thank you for reminding us of finding community, and also for people who are in my similar stage of like tenure track and trying to revise a book, mental health is really a definite, very important to consider when we're going through this process. So thank you for that reminder. So our final speaker for today is Professor Martina Nguyen, and I'm going to pass the floor to Professor Nguyen.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to thank everyone for being here. I want to thank my fellow panelists, and I apologize in advance that I'm going to probably echo a lot of the things that have already been said. I think that the fact that we're all saying many of the same things means that this is that there is a lot of overlap, and this is good advice, right? So like Ben, feel free to drop questions into the chat box. It's not an interruption. Happy to kind of field questions as they come along. But I guess I just wanted to share sort of my experience and the sort of big things that I took out of my experience of revising the dissertation into a book. For me, it was, for many people here, you've probably finished your dissertations. It was, a lot of people compare it to giving birth. It's an arduous process, right? Finishing your dissertation, doing the research, and now you have to do it all over again, except this is, higher stakes this time, right? But that said, for me, the process actually, in many ways, was more rewarding, changing the dissertation into a book. And actually, I learned a lot about, not just about my topic, but also about myself as well, and who I am as a scholar. When I finished my dissertation, I was told two pieces of advice by various advisors. The first is what Ben told you. Give yourself some space between the dissertation and the book. Give yourself some time. Let your dissertation marinate a little bit. In my case, I started, I didn't have a postdoc. I went straight to a tenure track job. So my first year was basically going from 0 to 100 miles an hour, like writing multiple lecture plans and new courses and all this. So basically for the entire first year of my tenure track job, I didn't didn't even look at the manuscript at all, which was actually great. So that was that was great, because once I returned to it at, you know, having taught a year at CUNY, having taught Baruch students for a whole year. I learned a lot of skills about how to actually make really, really complicated concepts much more accessible. And so I was able to marshal some of that into the book, the revisions. The second piece of advice that I received from my, actually my advisor, Peter Zinnemann at UC Berkeley, he said, before you actually start to revise the manuscript, find one or two scholars that you trust and that you value their opinion, and have them do a read through of your thesis. Think of it as a kind of pre-review review, right? So they can give you sort of ideas about where to go with it. And so I actually got two colleagues of mine to read my dissertation and gave me feedback about where I should be going with the revisions before starting the revision process itself. I mean, and chances are, you know, I mean, these are going to be the kind of demographic that, you know, that the editors will later down the line send your completed manuscript to, right? So I was able to do that. So, but the important thing to understand actually for me, and it took a while to understand this, is that actually your book has a different purpose than your dissertation. Your dissertation is supposed to convince your committee that you have done the research, that you know your topic, that you are sort of, you know, this is the process of going from apprentice to master, to use sort of medieval guild terms. This is about proving your chops as a scholar. And, you know, a dissertation basically has to sag with the weight of academic research, right? And a book is completely, it does a different thing. A book is a wider audience. You know, it's not your committee anymore. You know, there are also market considerations that a dissertation might not have. And so, and perhaps one of the most important things to understand is that actually with the dissertation, you have to prove your authority. With a book, you are the authority. And so you have to kind of get ownership of your voice as if you know this stuff, right? This is your book. And for me, this actually sort of segues into perhaps what is the most difficult part of the revision process for me, is actually figuring out what this book is about, right? What does it say? What's the overarching thesis and argument of this book? And, you know, for me, the big step about figuring this out is to identify who my target audience is. Who do I want to have conversations with, right? I mean, you know, for me, my book, I wanted to have conversations very clearly with Vietnam studies people, but I also wanted to have conversations with the wider Southeast Asian area studies group. But then I also wanted to reach beyond that and to have conversations with people who are interested in, you know, colonialism, imperialism in general. So once who you want to have kind of figure out, right, what this book is saying to each of these audiences. You know, and actually for me, that's when, you know, part of the revision process was actually reading. You know, for these different audiences, choose like 3 or 4, you know, books in each of these audiences. I chose sort of, you know, 5 books out of, you know, general European colonialism and imperialism, 5 books from, you know, Southeast Asian studies, and then 5 books in Vietnam studies, and figure out exactly what they're saying about your topic. And then that's when you can kind of figure out like how you are dialoguing with these 3, with these different groups, right? How does my work dovetail, and how does my work contribute to these various fields? And while I'm, and of course, but you're very careful, because as you read, it's so easy to go into theoretical rabbit holes, to go into all sorts of, you could read forever, but be targeted with your reading, and, and always keep in mind exactly how you're going to fit your work into this larger conversation. In the process of doing so, I also revisited my sources, right? Revisited my research, with fresh eyes, and hopefully as a more mature scholar. And I actually found that rereading my dissertation again, my views evolved, right? After years of it, after a year of experience of teaching, engaging with different colleagues, I actually found that my views on my very own dissertation topic evolved. And once you're sort of doing all of these things, for me, the one concrete exercise that really helped me was to write out what I call an argument outline. This is a 1 to 2 very short pages. Don't think of this as a book proposal. This is not a book proposal. This is an argument outline. Basically, really laying out the overarching thesis of your book, the big historiographical or methodological contributions of your work, right? Exactly how are you dialoguing with these various audiences, and then break down your chapters and the theses in those chapters and how they are related to your main thesis, right? So basically just like a kind of outline of the concrete, argument of your book. And this is, you'll refer to this, right? As you go through the body chapters, as you go through it, if you have a question of, should I cut this one section or should I revise this one section? How should I do so? Refer back to this like argument outline, right? And for me, like this kept me kind of tightly on track with what I'm, because revisions can spin out of control. And, this is a good kind of, lanes, right, for you to stay in. So that's my sort of a sort of concrete tool that I use to revise. But the revision process for me was I started with the body chapters first. Not to sort of repeat a lot of what Dorothea had said, but lots of cutting, right? Chances are your dissertation is probably longer than the book, right? My dissertation was something like almost 400,000 words. I was told I needed to cut down to about 100,000 words. So I had to cut a lot, right? So you'll do a lot of cutting, but save everything that you cut. You could recycle it as a separate, journal article. You might reintegrate something back into it based on your revisions. You never know. Remove the long footnotes. Grad students love power footnoting. Remove those. Long discussions of historiography, methodology, all that stuff, cut. Be ruthless about it. And of course, keep referring back to your argument outline, right? Even if something seems, crazy interesting, if it doesn't fit, then cut it, right? Like and of course, as I went through the body chapters and fixing, and revising, I actually, as I went along, I worked on the intro and the conclusion, right? Because, these are all integrated parts, and, rather than working on them separately, as I was revising the body chapters, ideas would come up. I would be working on the introduction and conclusion at the same time. Once you've sort of done all of that, then do a massive read through, make sure that it's coherent, and add connective tissue, right? Connective tissue is really important. That's how you tie these body chapters back to your main argument. That's how you keep the sort of continuity between chapters. That's how you, all that good stuff. So add connective tissue as necessary. The most important thing for me, though, perhaps the most important lesson for me from revising my book, my manuscript, was to find your own voice, right? This is, basically your first book is the book where you come into your own as a scholar, right? This is not your advisor's book. right? You're not trying to impress your dissertation committee anymore. And of course, I struggled a lot with imposter syndrome when I was revising this, right? I mean, oh my God, this is, it's paralyzing, but find your own book. This is your book. You are the authority now. You've done the research. Own your own work, right? Get rid of all that grad student prevaricating language, the fence sitting, like you're the authority. You've proven your chops, right? Own the book, own your voice. Get rid of that little voice of your advisor in the back of your head, right? Or you're not impressing your committee anymore, right? So you have to come into your own as a thinker and a scholar. Be bold, right? You've done the research. You can make really, really provocative, bold claims with your work. Like I said, no grad student prevaricating, like, this suggests this, or fence sitting. No, like you wanna be, bold and dynamic in your analysis and in the story that you tell. And then one last thing before I stop. I also want to echo Ben's big advice of community. For me, mentorship was really, really important in the process of revision. For me, it was a slightly more senior colleague, right? She's an associate professor. I was still assistant. She published her first book a couple of years before. So have somebody that you can brainstorm with. Sometimes I come to her with like a half-baked idea, and she's willing to brainstorm with me and talk it through. You could do this with a mentor, but you could also do it with the community, a workshop situation, any kind of like I said, community, because there's nothing worse, right? There's nothing worse than sitting in your office by yourself, freaking out about, the lack of revisions or the lack of progress on your manuscript, and watching your tenure clock like keep ticking by, right? There's nothing worse than that. So, put yourself out there, right? Be open to community, be open to mentorship. And then finally, last thing, a couple of resources for people who are in the process of revisions. This is specific to some of this is specific to people at CUNY, but there's a couple of things too that are definitely try to get subvention money if you can. I know I used PSC CUNY grants for subvention money. I also got some publication cost money. I published my book through, and everybody should look into this, but Columbia University has the Weatherhead series of the Weatherhead book series. That actually, I published my book through that, and that was a really great resource, because what they do is they support first-time authors, but also, not just first-time authors, but authors in general. They also commission one of the reviews, and then based on the strength of that review, then make contact with publishers. So I published my book through them. It was a great resource. I got some subvention money from them as well. I also know that AAS has a first book subvention prize, so you should apply for that. Also, CUNY has a pre-tenure book fellowship where sort of for untenured faculty can kind of workshop their books, and who are also in the process of doing revisions on their manuscripts. I know Nervier, you recently joined this program. I mean, it's an excellent program, and I'm sure other institutions have similar programs that put revising, scholars that are revising books in touch with one another. So yeah, that's so, you know, if there's money out there, apply for it. There is money for it, especially if you're working on some, you know, a book that has a lot of images, right? My book has a lot of images. I needed a subvention to publish these images, as well as for indexing. So yeah, there's money out there for that. Okay, I want to thank everyone again. Sorry, I think I went over time, but yes, thank you so much for inviting me and letting me share my experience.
Thank you so much, Professor Nguyen, and really appreciated all the insights from Professor Nguyen, but also from the rest of the speakers. I really appreciated how we can really like weave our teaching with our scholarship, as Professor Nguyen mentioned, and also like really thinking about the difference between a literary review for our dissertation and actually engaging with a community of scholars that we want to be in dialogue with. So I really appreciated that. So now we will proceed with our Q&A. So I'm sure many of our friends and colleagues in the Zoom meeting are really interested to ask questions. We have a Jamboard that I'm going to post the link of, but also feel free to post your questions in the chat if you don't want to use the Jamboard. The Jamboard gives us like some visualization, which is cool to like see which questions to ask to our authors and editors in the room. But also there's a takeaway. So if you want to put in your takeaway, I really invite everybody to post your takeaways from the session. So also, I want to acknowledge again Zheng Wang, our organizer for today's panel. And I also want to acknowledge Professor Meredith Wise, our leader for the New York Southeast Asian Network. She can't make it today because she's teaching, but she really spearheaded the organization of this panel and of obviously our panel speakers here for today and everyone in the Zoom room. So we have a couple of questions already. On our Jamboard, we have a couple of questions. I invite our editors and authors as well to look into the Jamboard, and feel free to pick the question that you want to ask. And then if you are in the audience, feel free to put in the chat your question or put it in the Jamboard. So let's begin with our questions for the editors. So I'm going to ask Sarah and Dorothea. Do you have specific questions in the Jamboard that you want to ask, that you want to answer for now?
I would love to take the. Oh, sorry. I don't know if you're just talking to the editors. I was going to talk about community, but.
Oh yeah, so why don't we do, let's do editor and then let's get back to Benjamin's question.
Okay, apologies.
No problem, yeah. Sarah and Dorothea, feel free to like pick one question from the Jamboard and see what we can talk about.
I see there's a question on the board and in the chat about overlap between journal articles and your book. That's a great question. It's somewhat idiosyncratic, kind of depends on your project and on where the journal articles are placed, and are they word for word your chapters, or are they simply arguments about your research that are using the same research that you're talking about in your book? In an ideal world, your book is something quite different from an article. An article is a discrete unit of research, and a book is a contextualization and a narrative of a broader topic. So, you know, when I get a project and there are 2 chapters that have already been published more or less as journal articles, that's a red flag for me, that there's nothing, you know, that there may not be enough new information in the book for me to sell it. And that's, you know, is sort of an aspect of book publishing that's not talked about very much, which is that we need to make money. It is, in fact, a financial operation. And so before I can ask for a contract, I have to prove to Cornell University Press that they are not going to, you know, go to the cleaner on this book, that they're going to recoup some costs. And that means we have to sell a certain number of books. So I would say if you have 2 chapters that have been published as journal articles, you know, talk to your editor and kind of work it out. If you find you have 3 or 4 journal articles that you want to be the book, think about what you want your book to be, and perhaps write your book slightly differently so that it doesn't incorporate those word for word pieces of research.
Thank you,
Can I
Sarah.
add one thing as well? I completely agree with you, Sarah. I think it's the same. We have a general ballpoint figure was always for me, maybe 1/3 could be previously published material in the book. However, not verbatim, not exactly like the journal article. You can take ideas, of course, from a journal article and work this. So this chapter is based on this journal article. Yes, that's absolutely fine. But also, I mean, you have to take into consideration the aspect of permissions. Again, where was the journal article published before, and you need permission for that to kind of then incorporate it into the book. So that's just something to be mindful of as well. Sorry,
awesome. Thank you so much, Dorothea and Sarah. So let's switch to our scholars, authors here. So there's a question about community that Ben wants to answer or respond to. And Martina, after Ben, feel free to pick a question from our Jamboard and also in the chat. Benjamin, the floor is yours.
Sure. Someone asked in the Jamboard about finding community outside of academia because they themselves are out of academia. And I think this is very important because, you know, increasingly with precarious labor being what it is now, you know, it's quite important to think of our fields as encompassing people and constituents who may not have academic positions, and definitely who may not have secure academic positions. Fortunately, in producing community, I think that your best bet is actually to look outside of academia. So right now, you know, I'm very much involved in the community building for my current research, and there's a little bit of scholarly activity there. You know, I've mostly cold emailed people. Sometimes there are people who work for NGOs. Sometimes there are people who are artists. Like there's some curators who I talk to regularly. There's some people working on independent projects. I mean, you can find them. I think that you know, figure out what your keywords are. You know, I'm looking through people's keywords. Joe has visual art, Southeast Asia, and curatorial practices. So write to some curators, right? If that's your project, you know, if people share your interests and are aligned with your interests closely enough, they'll be thrilled to write back. You know, emails are not a burden when you're mutually passionate about something. So I would say, you know, don't be afraid to, you know, sort of open yourself up for a kind of a shared conversation with people. If they're not interested, if they don't have time, you know, they might write you a brief response, and, you know, where it will be clear that they don't want to, you know, continue communicating. But I think most of the time, if you know, just do Google searches for people in organizations who seem to have interests that are very, very narrowly aligned with your questions, you'll end up with some fruitful relationships.
Thanks, Ben. Martina, did you have a specific question that you want to respond to?
Yeah, I guess I can answer the question about, you know, about what was your experience in developing the driving narrative of your monograph as you were revising the dissertation from the book. My experience was, for me, it may differ for people, but for me, I really, some people had, you know, some of my colleagues had trouble with, you know, pothole filling, right? Like there were gaps in research that needed to be addressed. I didn't necessarily have that problem per se, but for me, the struggle was, what is this book about, right? What's the contribution? What is this? What am I saying? And what's the overarching thesis of this book, right? I mean, I had so much research. It wasn't about pothole filling. It was really about, you know, bringing that research together into an argument that, you know, makes a impact and, you know, makes a contribution. And for me, the big thing was to identify who I wanted to talk to, right? Who were the audiences I wanted to talk to, and that actually really helped. For a while until I did that, I was spinning my wheels. I went down theoretical rabbit holes. You know, for a while, and then I realized that I was trying to impose something onto this work that I have done that actually does it. You know, I speaking to my mentor, right, my colleague, you know, she said, I was like, well, it could be cosmopolitanism, but what about this whole, I'm not ready to let go of the idea of like modernism, and you know, and she said, what do the sources say? You know, go back to the sources. What do they say? It sounds to me that you're wanting to, you know, you're kind of, you know, trying to jam, you know, a square hole into a round peg or whatever, you know, but basically go back to the sources. What do the sources say? And so that allowed me the space to then think about, okay, well, my sources say this, right? So this is what the research is telling me. Okay, these are my audiences, and now I need to make that leap, right, from what my sources are saying to the audiences I want to talk about. And that is the process that drove my thesis, that at least in my experience.
Thank you so much, Martina. That's really helpful as well for me in revising the dissertation to a book. I'm going to pick one question. I'm going to merge some questions in the chat and in the Jamboard about the when do you contact the editor, right? Do you need like a full-on manuscript? Have you revised the manuscript? Do you need to have a book proposal before you actually hit that send button in your email? At what stage do you actually need to contact the editor? Maybe that's for that's for Dorothy and Sarah.
Well, I don't think there's a set time. You can start whenever you feel ready, basically. Whenever you feel, okay, I'm nearly done with my dissertation, and I want to think about the next step. You can reach out and you can say, is there general interest? However, I think the best way is actually when you have a book proposal. You can also, you know, contact an editor beforehand. In previous times or prior to the pandemic, we had conferences, so you could talk to an editor face to face. And there I met with a lot of PhD students who were nearing the time of submitting their viva, and I was advising them there. So, but of course, it is a bit intimidating when it now goes in writing. So you can either ask for proposal forms and just approach an editor after you've identified your press, or you submit the proposal according to the proposal form that you found on the website or whatever. The editor will then give you feedback. And of course, for the peer reviewing stage, you definitely need to have the sample chapters. And that's not the thesis, that's the revised sample chapters, as I mentioned earlier. I think every press is different, and Sarah, you can pitch in as well, but we usually say a minimum of 3 revised chapters. If you have more, of course, you'll get more feedback from the academic advisors just because they'll read the entire manuscript. So I think that's it. I personally think it's never too early to initiate a conversation. I'm always happy. And also for us, I mean, if we're talking about the market and we need to assess if a book sells, we also need to know what people are researching about. And of course, everybody who's doing a PhD is right at the forefront of where there's new directions in the field. So I think we're always excited to hear from you. So.
Yeah, I'd echo that. For me, it's almost never too early to reach out and say, hey, I have this general project. I'm studying X, Y, and Z. Are you interested? Because it may be that I'll say, sounds great, but you should really talk to this other editor, this other list, you know, this other consideration, or I'm only interested in it. Southeast Asia Program Publications really is interested in single nation monographs. That's really our strength. Sometimes we do comparative work, but really it's a single nation monograph press. So if you say, I've started doing this project, I think it's going to be like a Borderlands thing, and this, that, and the other, I may say, that sounds interesting, but you know, not for me. That's super useful information for you to have as an author. But I agree, in general, I love talking to graduate students at conferences, and that's where I meet the most people and I learn what the exciting topics are that everyone's working on. And at the moment, because I haven't been to Asian studies in 2 years and I'm not going to Hawaii, I feel like I'm really out of date, to be honest. And I'm at the Cahen Center right now at Cornell, but there's no graduate students here. I'm literally the only person in the building. So there is, for you, I know there's a huge hurdle of intimidation to send me an email and say, hey, Sarah, are you interested in this? But on my end, I'm also a little bit in the dark. And so to get back to the advice that Martina gave you, you are the experts. And when you reach out to me and say, I've been doing research, I don't think, hey, this is just some graduate student. I think, oh, this is an expert whose book I may want to publish down the line, and so you really do have authority. As a graduate student, as a recent PhD, you have tremendous authority in your field. And as an editor, I presume you are the authority. So for me, it's almost never too early. Like, you shouldn't be a first-year graduate student, but honestly, I've seen papers given by first-year graduate students and sent them an email and been like, oh, you're only a first-year graduate student? Well, in 15 years, can you call me? Because I might be interested in your book. So and so it's just, and as Dorothea says, what we'll send for review varies press by press. I very much like to send a full manuscript for review. I think that's the fastest, most efficient, most helpful way to interact with an author. I think it's best for most authors. But don't send me your dissertation, send me a proposal or a cover letter that explains what you've done in a sample chapter. That's fine for me too. I don't have much time to read, To be honest, right now, I counted before coming in here, I have 65 projects in some stage of development right now. So if you send me more than 10 pages, I'm unlikely to read them, just for pragmatic purposes. Which doesn't mean I don't want to see your work, but it means that you have to speak above a pretty loud, I can't give you that much feedback right now. Once you're contracted, once you're one of my authors, then we can engage much more substantively.
Great, wonderful. Thank you so much. So we have 5 more minutes before we actually end the session. And there are really amazing questions here. Some of them we have covered from the responses and the presentations. Some of the questions in the chat, like about self-publishing, costs. We will put all these questions into the Jamboard so we can have like a visual record of everything. And I invite everybody again to post in their takeaways from this session. But I want us to end a minute or two to give us some parting words of encouragement, words of advice before we actually say goodbye to everybody. And again, this is just one of the sessions that we will be holding. And I'm also available if you want to contact me. I'm in the same process. I'm on tenure track. I'm revising my dissertation to a book. So I'm in the process with as many of you are in this meeting. So again, I'm going to invite all of our speakers again to give us like 1 minute advice before we actually say goodbye to everybody. So we'll start with our scholars. So why don't we start with Professor Martina Nguyen?
Putting me on the in the spot here.
On the spot.
What 1 minute? I guess just to sort of recap and crystallize what I just said. Find your voice, right? And this is you coming into your own as a scholar, right? This is not about impressing your advisor or your committee anymore. This is, you are the authority telling the story. You've done your research, trust that, let your interpretive brilliance shine through, be bold, be, dynamic, tell us a damn good story. Also this is if you find the community, if you cultivate mentorship, this is actually an incredibly rewarding process. And in many ways, it's stressful, it's anxiety producing. Like I said, I suffered from enormous amounts of imposter syndrome, but would I do it again? heck yeah, in a heartbeat. And I've already started on my second book project. So yeah, so yes, it's what I find your voice, find community, and really work on, what am I saying, right? What is this book? What is the driving thesis of this book? That's it.
Thank you so much, Martina. Ben.
Sure. As a final piece of advice, I would say check yourself during to make sure it's really important. Like you're going to have to live with it while you're revising, and then while it's being prepared for publication, and then once it's out, you're going to live with that book. So make sure it's something that you love, that you stand behind, and you'll be really amazed at how much trying to make sure that you love it dovetails with what publishers will also want.
Thank you so much, Professor Taussig. And we have Dorothea for her final comment.
I want to thank you all for attending. I think it's great that you're making the time available to listen, to get advice, to reach out, and just to hear. And I want to encourage you to get in touch, and hopefully this session has seen as well that we at the press, even though we're from two different presses here, represent approachable, that we are aware that it's a competitive landscape and there is a publisher for every book. Really feel confident and just don't be afraid to ask, don't be afraid to reach out. And we really I look forward to hearing from you, and I'm sure it's really, it's a pleasure to hear all of you about all of your important research.
Thank you for joining us, Dorothea. And Sarah, will end with your last comment.
Just to echo what Dorothea says, please reach out. I'm here. There are lots of editors sitting around waiting to hear what you have to say, and there is a publisher for every book. It's about finding your fit, and you will find it.
Great, wonderful. Thank you so much again to everyone. And again, for everybody, whether you're a student, graduate student, or someone like me revising the dissertation to book, happy writing, keep writing. Our book will get published. So next time we will do sessions about our launch of our books, and we'll talk about our book projects. So have a great weekend, everyone. Again, thank you so much, Dorothea, Sarah, Martina, and Ben, to Zheng and Professor Meredith Weiss, and to everybody who joined us today. Please feel free to reach out. This is just one of the many sessions, so hopefully we can gather again together, if not in person. But for now, take care and have a great weekend. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.